Hello and welcome to Esther's Gardening Adventures. I'm Esther, and today I'm going to share with you how I make and what ingredients I use to make a salve or salve that I apply whenever I get a mosquito bite from being outside or in the garden. I don't know about in your area, but here in the summer, I'm in Maryland, Zone 7A. In the summer here, mosquitoes can be really bad, and in particular, there is a type of mosquito called a tiger mosquito that is, its bites create big welts, they're itchy for days, and I don't think everybody necessarily has the same extreme reaction I do, but it's just really, it can be a deterrent to wanting to go out in the garden to know that you're going to be covered in mosquito bites coming in unless you cover yourself in mosquito repellent. I do try to wear long sleeves, and I also, and I wear my boots with pants every time I go out. But some days it's just too hot for long sleeves, and I will use mosquito repellent, but I know that, there's questions about sort of the healthfulness of this, and also I have tried natural remedies for mosquito repellent, and I've just not found them effective, especially against the tiger mosquito. The other mosquitoes aren't that bad of a problem, but the tiger one, it just doesn't work as well. So my solution has been, in the meantime, in addition to just trying to prevent getting bit, is to have little jars, miracle jars of these things, basically in every room in the house. I have one from when I come inside, from the in my living room. I have one in my office in case, I step outside during lunch and I come back and realize I got a mosquito bite. And I think I have one in the bedroom too. So I just keep these everywhere. And basically it's an oil and beeswax based balm that you can see. You just, let's say that I got a mosquito bite here, you just apply it like that. You can use as much or as little as you want. I like to put on a nice thick coat, and the nice thing about it being oil and beeswax based is that, that it coats it and it stays on, it doesn't run off or anything like that. So I find that if I use this balm, that almost instantly, or at least within the first couple of minutes, I definitely feel relief from the itchiness and the pain of the mosquito bite. And then usually within a half an hour, the swelling is significantly, if not entirely, reduced. And unlike in the past where I would be itchy for days and just, uncontrollable itching all over from everything, I have found that this takes away the itch permanently, whereas the stuff that I buy at the drugstore that's supposed to be itch relief, it really only works temporarily. What this does, and I'll talk to you about the ingredients I use for it and the herbs that kind of make this happen, but what this does is it draws out the toxins from your mosquito bite, and it also helps the skin cells regenerate and heal, and it's anti-inflammatory. So it kind of does all the things you need to handle a mosquito bite. But what it doesn't do is, because it is oil-based, it isn't good for treating things like that you need the bite or the rash to dry up, like poison ivy. This would not help it because it is moist. So it can help in a lot of cases, but not in every situation. Before I go any further into this, let me also say that this is my second time making this batch. I learned a lot about the two plants I'm using in this recipe, and I've done a lot of research on this, but I definitely recommend that if you're kind of digging into herbal medicine, that there's two kind of tips I have for you. One is find a reputable resource, not just online stuff, because you'll find all kinds of information online, and some of it's accurate and some of it's a little more questionable in my opinion. But I try to get books that have good use among herbalists and reputations. One is Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs, is one I have found extremely useful. I mean, I go in here all the time and use it for reference after I read it the first time, and it includes the processes I'm going to use today. So I definitely recommend having your own sort of reference guides. And one of the reasons this is helpful is also because each herb, while things like the two that I'm going to be using today are relatively safe, and even for children, there are some herbs that you want to be careful in using, and in particular who you give it to when you make your concoction of whatever that is, because sometimes they can have counter effects. For example, lemon balm, which I love to put in tea. It's beautifully tasting, but it actually can cause problems for people with thyroid issues. And so you want to be careful if you're handing out like a tea mix you've made that has lemon balm in it, not to give it to someone or put a label on it or something to let anybody who might have thyroid issues or be taking thyroid medicine know not to do that. And if you haven't researched or used books or things like that, you could cause problems, and that's where kind of the concerns about using herbal medicine can come in. But if you're just careful about it, everything will be fine. All right, now let me talk about the two plants I'm using for this salve. One is the calendula flower, and I have what's left of a jar here. With the calendula flowers, they're great because you can grow them from spring till the first frost, or even through the frost until you start getting heavy frosts, because they are frost hardy in Maryland Zone 7A. And basically, there's processes for harvesting them to have the best benefit. There's certain times of day and when they've certain blossomed or whatever. I basically try to get them before they start losing their petals. And I bring them in and I put them on a paper plate and I let them dry entirely. And then I stuff them in a jar with some kind of moisture absorber to make sure that there isn't any leftover residual issues. So what's left in here is from this year's harvest. The batch I've made for this video has included both this year's harvest and last year's harvest because it's better to use the older stuff first. So hopefully it'll be as effective as the last batch I made. The other thing, and okay, so about calendula, why it's so awesome. So the calendula flower has a resin in it that actually promotes cell regrowth for the skin and healing. And it is an anti-inflammatory and an antiseptic. So it can be really beneficial when you're trying to treat something that is causing a rash or like a bug bite that causes inflammation on the skin. The other plant that I use, and I'm not sure how common it is around the world, but I know where I live, it is considered a problematic weed. And until I went to a first aid, forage your own first aid stuff class, which I just randomly took a couple of years ago, way before I started getting into gardening, I found out that there's this one plant that grows in my yard that I've been mowing down for years and weed whacking and pulling out for years, called broadleaf plantain. And I'll take you outside so you can see what it looks like. And the word plantain usually conjures thoughts of like that banana-like plant, right, that you can get from the store and cook up. But this is actually not, it is edible, but it's not what produces the banana. Now here's a jar I made like last year with the leaves, and you can't see too well, but basically they have big leaves, they have veins in the back, and they have, I didn't save any of the seeds in here, but they have like a long seed-like structure. Actually, broadleaf plantain has so many values, and in fact, our resident groundhog, Bald Bob, I can tell you the story about him at some point. He loves to eat plantain in the yard, and it has all kinds of vitamins in it, but the reason we're using it for this particular recipe is that broadleaf plantain actually pulls out the toxins. It draws out the toxins in a wound or an irritation or anything like that. And it's especially effective if you can get the plantain materials onto the site of whatever you're trying to treat relatively early before it's kind of all closed up and reacted to the body. And you can even use broadleaf plantain if you're out, on a walk and you get a mosquito bite or a bee sting or anything like that. You can actually, and it's called a spit poultice, and it sounds gross, but you can actually take a clean leaf, wipe it off, clean it off, and then chew it, and then put the spit poultice on whatever bite or sting you have. And not only will it help draw out the toxins, but it also has a cooling effect. And so, it can be really useful in that way. It's one of my favorite things because it grows everywhere, and I really don't have to do anything to go find it. Now, when you are making these salves, there are a couple things you want to do. First of all, you don't want to rinse the herbs, because if you add water to the process, you're introducing more moisture that could then cause mold and fungus and just take a lot longer in the process. So you want to try to harvest the plants as clean as possible, and just make sure they're healthy, the best looking specimens, not the things that are bug infested or diseased or anything like that. You want the best of the best. The other thing to know is, now I haven't experienced this personally, but the effectiveness of the plant can vary from year to year because it's based on the conditions that it grows in, how everything was the year it grew, and all of that. And so some years an herb can be way more effective than others, and that is a little bit challenging sometimes, but I haven't found a problem with that yet. Granted, I've only done that once. All right, so let me take you outside and show you what a plantain plant looks like, and we'll harvest some and get going on this process. Here we have a great example patch of broadleaf plantain. I find that it is easily identifiable by the leaves. Let's see. It has sort of these ridges in the back, and sometimes it'll have purple in the stem. And you want to get leaves that are healthy, don't have too many holes in them. You want to get them obviously in a place where, for example, I don't harvest them from my backyard because my dogs do their business back there. So this is like a side yard right outside of our side gate on our driveway, which is where I harvested this year's set. But basically you want, when you're harvesting the herb, you can take the leaves. Now I've heard the seeds can also be, this is what the seed structure looks like. Give you a kind of closer view here. And I've heard the seeds can also be used for medicinal purposes. I haven't explored that yet, but basically I just harvest the leaves. I try to make sure they're as clean as possible. And you want to harvest, I don't know how many cups worth, but a nice little basket's worth. Enough to fill, the half to 3/4 of the jar that you want to use to make your infused oils. And it really will come back anywhere it grows. It's quite hardy. I mow this and I weed whack this area several times a month, and it still comes back. So it is an ever ready crop. All right, so now I'm going to make the infused oil, the calendula and broadleaf plantain infused oil. So really, I'm going to use 2 ball jars. I figured I'd use fun-shaped ones so they look kind of decorative. I'm also going to use these reusable plastic leak-proof lids because I find that the metal ones can get, can get rusty or other things, and I'd rather just not worry about having any weird contamination. I'm also using, now you can use all kinds of oils. A lot of people like to use coconut oil or lighter oils than I'm going to be using, but I use extra virgin olive oil or olive oil. What I do is, the first thing you do is, of course, you rinse and dry your jars. And then you take your dried herbs. We'll start with the what I'm going to do for the plantain. You just dump them in there. Now you can, in my case, I will probably crush them a little bit once they're all in there. There's really no rule as to how much you go in there. You just kind of get them in there, fit as many as you can. You can break them up if you want it to help break down faster. Like you could chop them up. Me crushing them in here will probably help with that a little bit. Maybe I'll just break them up a little bit before I put them in. There we go. And plantain doesn't have a really strong particular smell on its own. It's kind of a neutral, earthy, grassy, green kind of thing. So there we have it. It's about, what, 1 inch, 2 inches from the top? Probably 2 inches from the top, maybe even 3. And then you just pour your oil in. You want it to cover it fully, and probably give it an inch or two of extra coverage. If you can. Now you have two options. You can put it in a cupboard, which is what I did last year, and just leave it there for like a month. Or you can put it on a windowsill to get some sunlight. I'm going to try the windowsill option this time to see if we get it working a little faster. And for the calendula, I'm probably, let's see, how much of the oil? Oh, we didn't even use half a bottle. Yeah, so we have enough. Trying to make sure my hands stay dry here. You do not want to introduce moisture to this if you can help. Because, so these are, the top is calendula flowers from last year. And I'm going to try to do a mix of both ones from last year and this year so that I know, in case last year's ones weren't quite, you know, they may have lost their mojo over time. So I'm probably going to put some from this year's harvest in there as well. And you can put the whole flower in. Now in this case, for the petals, because there's a little moisture on the counter now, I'm not going to put those in. But okay, so we've got this packed in here fairly well. Maybe a little bit more of the flowers. Now, I may not use all of the calendula oil for this formula. I may save some of it. I may not use all of the plantain oil for this formula. So, okay, there you have it. That's how it looks. And again, just pour it in. Perfect. All right, there you have it. So 25 fluid ounces about will take care of 2 jars worth. And that's, look how pretty that looks even down in there. I don't want to tip it too much. But yeah, you want it to be above, let me put that in recycling. You want it to be above the levels. And there you have it. Let's go put these on a sunny shelf. Today is September 26th, so we've had just way more than 2 weeks worth of sun from the window, and you can tell the color of the oil is definitely more yellow than it was before. For the broadleaf plantain, I think also the color has gotten much more of the green. Okay, so now for what you should have on hand for making the balm or the salve or the ointment itself. So you want to have some beeswax. This is left over from when I made it last year. These are just little granules. Melt faster in the pan. You'll want some kind of plate and spoon to test your mix on to make sure that it is the consistency you want. So you want to have something like that on hand. Obviously, you will want the jars that you're then going to take the infused oil out of. And then you want something to filter it through. You can use a cheesecloth, you can use a fine grain filter like this one or like this one I have here. And because the particles in these are not like super small, I should be safe using this. You'll also want to have something to collect it, like this, or a glass jar, something like these guys. You'll want something to put the salve or ointment you're making in. In this case, I got these cute little jars that seal nicely. Close down like that. And I washed them ahead, which is why I had to reassemble it just now, but I washed them with hot water and soap ahead of time and made sure they were fully dry before we started making this. You can also use something like a metal kind of thing where you could dip your finger in. I tend to like the sealable ones because let's say you leave it in your purse or you take it on a picnic or something, you don't want it melting and the contents going everywhere. You'll also need some measuring cups and of course a pan to heat it in. And I think that covers all the stuff you need for the initial. And here we have, let's start with the more important one of the two, although they both play a role, but I tend to do like a 3-to-1 ratio. Last year I think I did a 3-to-1 ratio of the plantain oil versus the calendula oil. I may use the spoon here to hold most of it in. Now, if you really want to get the ultimate amount out, you can put it in a cloth and squeeze it or something like that, but I'm not too worried about that. I will probably tip this jar upside down over something and just get all the oil I can out of it. But I think this is enough for now. The calendula oil. And this is I'm trying this one for the first time. We will see how it works. Ooh. Part of the reason I'm using this one for the flowers is that I want to make sure I'm getting as much as I can out of this. Now let me get a different spoon. Maybe I'll just use since I don't have a spoon on hand, maybe I'll just use the back of this. And what I like to do is actually to use these flowers to put them in my bath, because the flowers themselves retain a lot of oil. So I'll put them back in the jar and I will probably end up putting a little bit of the liquid in with them. All right. The rule of thumb for making salves or ointments with beeswax is for every cup of oil, medicinal oil you use, like these, you add 1/4 of a cup of beeswax. So I'm going to do the 1/4 of the cup of beeswax first. Trying to make sure that's pretty even there. And then I'm going to do, for this, I'm going to do 3/4 a cup of the plantain oil and 1/4 of a cup of the calendula oil, because the majority of the benefit we want here is from the plantain oil. So I'm just going to measure this. I'm sure there's a much better way to do this, but I'm going to measure this in fourths. So 1, 2, 3, and that got us, well, there's probably a 1/4 cup left. There we have it. I just hope this pours well. 1, there we go. So now we have a full cup in here. And let's put it on low and start melting it. Okay. You can see a little bit of a flame. And I'm just going to use my spatula to stir it. Really, I don't need to worry about it at the very beginning. It takes quite a while to heat up. You can do this in a double boiler also, but last year I did it on low in a pan like this and it worked just fine. So I think it took about 5 to 10 minutes, so I'll come back once we're pretty close to fully melted. So it's been about 8 minutes at a low heat and we're finally starting to see the wax melt. It really is like you don't see any change, and then within like a minute it all starts disappearing. I guess it just has to get to the right temperature to melt. We have this one chunk that is kind of big here, but the rest, just in the time I've talked, has disappeared like that. I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds for that one big chunk to melt, and then we're gonna do the spoon test. Okay, so it's all done. I'm gonna turn off the thing, and I'm going to just take a small little bit, and I'm gonna put it on here. You can already see the kind of waxy thing it's creating. And I'm gonna put it in the freezer for a minute. So the beeswax, this mixture has been in the freezer for a minute. And I put my hand over it and I just wanna see how much of a texture it has. Is it enough of a consistency to, you know, not be fully melty? To me, this seems like a good texture. It's enough to coat the skin, which is what we want, and give a little bit of layer to that if we want to have a thicker coat on the skin where we get our bug bite. But that seems just about perfect to me. So that ratio worked well. So now all we have to do is bottle this up. Okay, we have here our bottles. I'm only going to do 2 because I'm saving the third for a pure calendula salve to give to my sister. And I probably should have something to pour it more evenly, but I think this will be fine. There's one. And let's pour this one in. Oh, that one got a little bit on the side. That's fine. We just want to let this sit and cool until it's completely solid, and you can see already that the bottom is starting to solidify. I can do the cleaning up later. Now do be careful because these bottles can get hot. You don't want to hurt yourself. And I'm just going to put the rest of this into another little jar that's not as consequential. It's not as pretty for giving away. That's just for my purposes. It's next morning and you'll have to excuse the noise. I have my dehydrator running. But it's the next morning and these are the bug balm salves I made last night. I put a bee on the top so I wouldn't mix them up with the pure calendula oil. This is the calendula salve that I'm just going to keep to mix with other things, and this is just pure calendula. This is a salve as well that I'm going to give to my baby sister. And you can see, as well as this here, you can see it looks quite beautiful, doesn't it? And it's hard to tell, but it does have a little bit more of a green tint. See how it's a slightly lighter color than the pure calendula one, and I think that's because the broadleaf plantain has more of a green tint to it, so you get a little bit less of a bright yellow there. And in case you're interested in what it looks like when you pour it into one of these, that's what it looks like. Now I got a little bit of residue on the side, but if you pour it properly, it creates a nice little beautiful clean looking container. Also last night, or this morning, I took the remainder of the broadleaf plantain and I squeezed it out through a cheesecloth just to be able to have that. I'm going to put that in a jar and store it once I filter it out one more time to get the sort of the stuff on the bottom off. There's a little bit of calendula oil left in the bottom of this thing. So I'm going to do the same for this and get all the oil I can out of it. And then I have a jar of flowers with calendula oil from last year in my bathroom that I use for my bath oils. So I'll put some of these in there because they probably, like I said last night, still have some of the oil on them. And it's great for your skin. My skin always feels so smooth after I use just 1 or 2 of the flowers in my bath. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching how I make this bug balm salve, and definitely play around, you know, get comfortable with making things like this and trying it. And I really encourage you to. It's not as scary as it appears at first sight, like it was for me. It was kind of intimidating, but it really can be fun and sort of empowering to be able to, you know, have something. I mean, all of this stuff I've bought to treat bug bites has never worked as effectively as this little jar does. So I definitely recommend, you know, giving it a try, seeing how it works for you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button And if you aren't already a subscriber, please consider doing so. Make sure you have the bell set so you get alerts when I post new content. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.